You know that feeling when someone drains your energy just by being in the room. The coworker who takes credit for your work. The friend who only calls when they need something. The partner who makes you question your own reality. They're not just annoying, they're toxic. And they're counting on you not recognizing what they're doing. Toxic people have patterns, predictable patterns. And once you can spot those patterns, you can expose their games and neutralize their power in seconds. Not hours, not days, seconds. Because toxic behavior follows scripts that Niccolò Machiavelli identified 500 years ago when he watched manipulators operate in Renaissance Italy. Machiavelli studied power dynamics obsessively. He watched who succeeded through manipulation and who failed. He identified specific tactics that toxic people use consistently. And, more importantly, he identified the exact vulnerabilities in those tactics that let you dismantle them instantly if you know where to look. Today, I'm going to reveal how to expose and outsmart toxic people in seconds using Machiavellian analysis. Not generic advice about setting boundaries. Specific tactical responses to specific toxic behaviors. By the end of this video, you'll have a framework for identifying toxic patterns instantly and neutralizing them before they gain traction. You'll recognize the games being played and know exactly how to end them. This isn't about being cruel. This is about protecting yourself from people who are being cruel to you. Let's begin with Machiavellian Power Strategies. Before we dive into the tactics, understand what makes someone toxic versus just difficult. Difficult people have needs and express them badly. Toxic people have agendas and express them through manipulation. The difficult person wants something and asks for it poorly. The toxic person wants something and makes you think giving it to them was your idea. That's the difference. Intent to manipulate versus poor communication skills. Machiavelli studied manipulators extensively. He noticed they all shared certain characteristics. They presented false faces. They created dependency in others. They violated trust strategically. They operated through proxies. They manufactured crises. They controlled narratives. These weren't random behaviors. These were calculated techniques. And every technique has a counter-technique if you understand the underlying mechanism. The key insight Machiavelli offers is this: toxic people rely on your unawareness. The moment you see the game loses power. They need you confused, doubting yourself, making excuses for them. The instant you recognize the pattern clearly, their influence collapses. Your job is to accelerate that recognition from months or years down to seconds. Once you can spot toxic patterns instantly, you can respond instantly. And instant response prevents the manipulation from taking root. Before we continue, if you want to master Machiavellian power strategies that protect you from manipulation, subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell. I break down power dynamics, toxic behavior patterns, and strategic self-defense every week. And leave a comment telling me what toxic pattern you've encountered most. I want to know what you're dealing with. This community learns by sharing real experiences. Now let's reveal how to expose and outsmart toxic people in seconds. The first pattern is false humility as bait. This is when someone presents themselves as humble, struggling, or victimized to lower your defenses and make you want to help them. Machiavelli observed that appearing weak was often a strategy for gaining power. The person who seems to need help gets assistance. Then they use that assistance as leverage. Here's how to spot it in seconds. Listen to their stories. Are they always the victim? Does bad luck follow them constantly? Do they have explanations for why nothing is ever their fault? That's not humility. That's strategic victimhood. They're positioning themselves as helpless to trigger your helping instinct. Once you help, they have leverage. You've invested in them. Now they can guilt you into helping more because you've already helped before. The instant exposure. Ask them what they're doing to solve their own problem, not what happened to them, what they're actively doing about it. The toxic person will have elaborate explanations for why they can't do anything. The genuinely struggling person will show you their efforts. That question exposes whether the helplessness is real or performed. If they resist the question, if they get defensive, if they return immediately to victim narrative without answering what they're doing, you've just identified toxicity in seconds. The Machiavellian counter: don't offer help, offer advice. The toxic person wants your time, energy, or resources. They don't want solutions because solutions end the dynamic that gives them power. When you offer advice instead of help, you're testing whether they want to solve the problem or exploit it. If they take the advice and act, they weren't toxic. If they reject every suggestion and keep asking for direct help, they're toxic. You've exposed it, and you disengage immediately. The second pattern is triangulation games. This is when someone creates conflict between you and a third party to maintain control over both relationships. Machiavelli noted that dividing potential allies was essential strategy for maintaining power. Toxic people do this instinctively in personal relationships. Here's how to spot it in seconds. Someone tells you what another person said about you. Something negative. Something that creates doubt or hurt. But notice they're the only source of this information. The third party hasn't said anything to you directly. The toxic person is the messenger creating the conflict. Why? Because conflict between you and the third party means both of you need the toxic person as intermediary. They become essential to resolving a conflict they created. The instant exposure: go directly to the third party. Don't tell the toxic person you're doing this. Just reach out to the person who supposedly said something about you. Say you heard something and want to clarify directly. Watch what happens. Either the third party confirms it and you have real information, or they have no idea what you're talking about and you've just discovered the toxic person was lying to create division. The Machiavellian counter: once you've confirmed triangulation, you cut the toxic person out of information flow between you and the third party. You establish direct communication. This removes their power source. Triangulation only works when they control information flow between two parties. Direct communication eliminates their leverage. They'll often escalate when you do this because you've dismantled their control mechanism. That escalation is confirmation you made the right move. The third pattern is moving goalposts. This is when someone changes requirements after you've met them, ensuring you can never actually succeed or satisfy them. Machiavelli understood that keeping people in permanent pursuit prevented them from gaining independence. The toxic person applies this to relationships and work dynamics. Here's how to spot it in seconds. They ask you to do something. You do it. Instead of acknowledgement, they immediately point out what you didn't do or how you should have done it differently. The goalpost has moved. You met the stated requirement, but now there's a new unstated requirement. This creates a pattern where you're constantly trying to please them but never quite succeeding. The instant exposure. The next time they give you a requirement, get it in writing or confirm it verbally in front of witnesses. Email works perfectly. Then, when you deliver exactly what was requested, if they move the goalpost, you pull out the original requirement. You show them you delivered exactly what they asked for. This forces them to either acknowledge you succeeded or explicitly admit they're changing requirements after the fact. Either way, the game is exposed. The Machiavellian counter: once you've identified moving goalposts, you stop playing. You establish that you will meet clearly defined requirements, but you will not chase constantly changing standards. If they can't define clear success criteria, you don't accept the task. This removes their ability to keep you in permanent pursuit. They'll typically respond by either defining clear standards, which ends the game, or refusing to define standards, which reveals the game publicly. The fourth pattern is selective memory. This is when someone remembers things that benefit them and forgets things that don't. Machiavelli observed that rewriting history was a common tactic for maintaining favorable narratives. Toxic people do this in real time during conflicts. Here's how to spot it in seconds. During a disagreement, they claim they never said something you clearly remember them saying, or they claim you said something you never said. They're not forgetful. They're strategically reconstructing events to put you at fault. This makes you doubt your own memory. If this happens repeatedly, you start questioning your perception of reality. That's the goal. The instant exposure. Start documenting interactions. Not obviously, just notes to yourself, dates, what was said, who was present. Then, when they claim something didn't happen, you have a record. You don't even have to show them the record immediately. Just knowing you have it changes your confidence level. You stop doubting yourself because you have external verification. That confidence shift alone often stops the tactic because it's not working anymore. The Machiavellian counter. When they claim to not remember something important, you don't argue. You say you'll send them a written summary of what you both agreed to previously. This forces them to either accept your version or provide their version in writing. Either way, you're creating documentation that prevents future selective memory. If they refuse to engage with written communication, that refusal itself exposes the tactic. People with genuine memory issues welcome documentation. People using selective memory strategically resist it. The fifth pattern is manufactured urgency. This is when someone creates artificial time pressure to force decisions before you can think clearly. Machiavelli noted that rushed decisions favor the person creating the rush. Toxic people use false urgency to bypass your rational evaluation. Here's how to spot it in seconds. They present something that needs immediate decision or action. But when you ask why it's urgent, the explanation is vague or circular. It needs to happen now because it needs to happen now. There's no actual external deadline. The urgency is manufactured to pressure you. Real urgency has external causes. Fake urgency has only their insistence. The instant exposure. Ask a simple question. What happens if we wait 24 hours? If they can't articulate a specific concrete consequence of that delay, the urgency is fake. If waiting briefly creates catastrophic consequences, they can explain those consequences clearly. If they just get more insistent without clear explanation, you've exposed manufactured urgency in seconds. The Machiavellian counter. Refuse to make significant decisions under artificial time pressure. State clearly that you need time to consider. If they claim there's no time, you ask them to document the urgency and consequences of delay. This usually causes the urgent matter to suddenly become less urgent. Why? Because documenting false urgency creates liability. They were using time pressure as a manipulation tool. The moment you require documentation, the tool becomes dangerous to them. The sixth pattern is strategic incompetence. This is when someone performs badly at tasks they don't want to do, training you to stop asking them and do it yourself. Machiavelli understood that appearing incapable was sometimes a strategy to avoid unwanted responsibilities. Toxic people weaponize this in relationships and work. Here's how to spot it in seconds. They claim they can't do something, but it's something they're clearly capable of or have done before. They do it so poorly, you have to redo it. They ask so many questions that helping them takes longer than doing it yourself. They're not actually incompetent, they're strategically incompetent. They're training you through negative reinforcement to stop delegating to them. The instant exposure. Observe whether their incompetence is selective. Can they do complex things they want to do but fail at simple things they do not want to do? Can they navigate complicated video games but can't figure out how to load the dishwasher? That selectivity exposes strategic incompetence. Real incompetence is consistent across domains. Strategic incompetence appears only for unwanted tasks. The Machiavellian counter. You refuse to accept strategic incompetence. When they claim they can't do something, you don't do it for them. You maintain that they're capable and you expect completion. If they do it badly, you don't redo it. You return it to them for correction. You're reversing the training. Instead of learning to do it yourself, they learn that strategic incompetence doesn't work on you. This is uncomfortable initially, but it's the only way to stop the pattern. The seventh pattern is guilt distribution. This is when someone makes their problems your responsibility through guilt manipulation. Machiavelli observed that creating obligation in others was a key method of control. Toxic people create guilt to manufacture obligation. Here's how to spot it in seconds. They're upset or struggling, but instead of asking for help directly, they just make sure you know they're suffering. They sigh, they make comments, they post vague social media updates. They're not communicating needs clearly. They're distributing guilt. The goal is to make you feel responsible for fixing their problem without them having to ask. This way, if you help, you volunteered. If you don't help, you're the bad person who ignored their obvious suffering. The instant exposure. Ask directly what they need, not what's wrong. What specifically do they need from you right now? This forces them to either make a clear request or admit they don't have one. If they have a request, you can evaluate it and choose to help or not. If they don't have a request, they have to admit they were just guilt broadcasting. Either way, you've short-circuited the guilt manipulation. The Machiavellian counter: you establish that you respond to clear requests, not to guilt broadcasts. When someone sighs dramatically, you don't ask what's wrong. When someone posts vague updates, you don't reach out. You only engage when they communicate directly. This trains people that guilt distribution doesn't work on you. They have to communicate clearly if they want your help. The toxic people will usually stop trying because you're not rewarding the behavior. The non-toxic people will adjust to direct communication. These are 7 toxic patterns you can expose and outsmart in seconds. False humility as bait, triangulation games, moving goalposts, selective memory, manufactured urgency, strategic incompetence, guilt distribution. Each pattern has an instant exposure method and a Machiavellian counter. Once you can recognize these patterns, you can neutralize them before they take root. Here's what Machiavelli understood that most people miss. Toxic people rely on time. They need time to build their manipulations, to create dependency, to make you doubt yourself. But if you can recognize the pattern in the first interaction, you can stop it immediately. You don't need months of therapy to realize someone's toxic. You need pattern recognition. And patterns are visible in seconds if you know what to look for. The false humility person reveals themselves when you ask what they're doing to solve their own problem. The triangulator reveals themselves when you go directly to the third party. The goalpost mover reveals themselves when you document requirements. The selective memory person reveals themselves when you create records. The manufactured urgency person reveals themselves when you ask for 24 hours. The strategic incompetence person reveals themselves through selective capability. The guilt distributor reveals themselves when you ask for clear requests. Every toxic pattern has a signature. Learn the signatures and you can spot toxicity instantly. This isn't about being suspicious of everyone. This is about having clear tests that quickly distinguish toxic behavior from normal human imperfection. Everyone has bad days. Everyone occasionally communicates poorly. But toxic people have consistent patterns. The patterns repeat. Once you see the pattern twice, you can predict it will happen a third time. That prediction is your power. Here's how to use this strategically. When you meet someone new or encounter a situation that feels off, run these tests mentally. Are they always the victim? Do they create triangles? Do they move goalposts? Do they have selective memory? Do they manufacture urgency? Do they show strategic incompetence? Do they distribute guilt? These questions take seconds to consider, and if the answer to multiple questions is yes, you've identified toxicity before it can damage you. The Machiavellian approach to toxic people isn't to fix them. It's not to understand them. It's not to have compassion for whatever made them this way. It's to identify them quickly, neutralize their tactics, and disengage. You're not responsible for fixing toxic people. You're responsible for protecting yourself from them. Machiavelli watched good people destroyed by manipulators they kept trying to understand or help. He concluded that the strategic response to toxicity is separation, not rehabilitation. Some people will say this is cold. It's realistic. Toxic people cause real damage. They drain energy, destroy confidence, waste time, create conflict, and prevent growth. Every moment spent managing toxic relationships is a moment not spent on productive relationships. The cost is enormous. By learning to identify and neutralize toxicity in seconds, you're not being mean. You're practicing efficient self-defense. Master these 7 patterns. Practice the exposure techniques. Deploy the Machiavellian counters. Within weeks, you'll notice your life has less drama, less confusion, less emotional exhaustion. Not because toxic people stopped existing, because you stopped allowing their tactics to work on you. You started seeing the games in seconds instead of months, and once you see the game, you stop playing it. That's Machiavellian Power Strategies. That's how you expose and outsmart toxic people in seconds. Not by being toxic yourself, by being strategic about recognizing and neutralizing toxicity before it gains power over you. Machiavelli studied manipulation for 14 years, so you don't have to. These patterns are what he found. Use them. Protect yourself. And stop wasting energy on people who are strategically draining it. See you in the next one.